North Dakota QA case review orientation agenda for our PIP baseline case reviews. So welcome. I'm actually going to turn the agenda over to Diana Weber from Children and Family Services in Bismarck for first part of our agenda. Diana?
Thanks, Leanne. Good morning, everyone. Afternoon. Oh my gosh, it's afternoon. It's a Monday. Welcome to our call. We're so glad to have you here with us. And just to note that we are recording, I think are both of these being recorded, Leanne? Yes. So if you need to reflect on it later, we're going to give instruction or send out instruction for you to do that. Or if you have coworkers who weren't able to attend, those sessions will be available. Anyway,
actually, Diana,
yeah.
I'm just going to jump in and clarify. We are recording both, but our thought is that one recording, the better recording out of the two, we will make available. But if that needs to change, we can always adjust course.
Thank you. It likely won't be this one. Just saying. I don't even know what time of day it is. Okay. I'm just going to do a brief overview as to why we're here together this afternoon, and that is related to our case review process. And just a little bit of history for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the case review process or new to the workforce. Our case reviews are a federal requirement, and we've been doing those on and off for many, many years now. And when they've been off, it's been likely due to some workforce capacity issues. Most recently, we had a federal review in 2016 in September, and that's a federal review that occurs in every state in the United States. And based upon the findings in those reviews, the states are required to either, they're going to be in full compliance, or they're going to be required to write a program improvement plan, otherwise known as a PIP. So for our review in 2016, we did not, quote, pass, and there were some areas that were not in substantial conformity. So we were held to writing a program improvement plan. So that plan was submitted and written over and negotiated with our federal partners for a long period of time, and then approved in April of 2019. So that was quite a long time between the review in 2016 and the approval of that PIP. As part of having a PIP, we are required to measure our casework practice through these case reviews. And our case reviews were previously run through a contract with University of North Dakota's Children and Family Services Training Center. And you recall Leanne was our OCR on-site case review manager at that time, for those of you that were part of this process. That contract has since ended, because as a result of Senate Bill 2124 in our last legislative session, we were given authority by the legislature to have a quality assurance unit actually within Children and Family Services. And so we've been spending the last several months trying to organize and form that unit, and it's now come to fruition, and I'm happy to announce that Leanne Miller is back on with Children and Family Services as the manager of the Quality Assurance Unit. And they've been working on hiring staff for that unit as case reviewers and QA leads, and also an admin assistant to support the work that they're going to be doing for quality assurance and other activities as it relates to continuous quality improvement in child welfare. So all that to say, here we are now today. Because it took longer to form this unit than anticipated, we're held to a pretty quick and concerning time frame to complete these case reviews. Our baseline reviews for our PIP must be completed by March 31st of 2020. And therefore, we have a very short period of time in order to complete these cases. There needs to be a minimum of 65 cases reviewed, 40 of those foster care cases, 25 of those in-home cases. And so we've been working fast and furiously to get this organized and set up. You may have heard already from one of our QA reviewers related to a case that potentially was drawn for review in our sample, but more of those details will come during the call today. So in a nutshell, that's what brings us to this call today, is getting organized and prepared and preparing you all who do the work with our children and families for this impending case review process that's starting very, very soon. And I'll hand it over to Leanne.
All right, thank you. So yes, I'm very glad to be back and as the QA manager with Children and Family Services, and I started up at the end of November, and we now have 6 reviewers hired, and 2 more will be joining us at the beginning of January. So you can imagine we've got a lot going on and stepping into a very ramped up time schedule here, but it's very exciting and we're glad to move forward. The QA unit, the other piece about our unit is we are remotely located. I'm joining you from Grandin, North Dakota, and we have reviewers located throughout the state. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about today is how we're going to achieve these case reviews for 65 cases. If you have been familiar with the process in the past, you may be used to a state process where we would come out on site to the 8 regional human service center. We would pull a sample of cases within that region and conduct a review. We were generally there for a week, and we would review the designated number of cases for foster care and in-home. CPS practice is assessed as it appears in those cases. And we would repeat that process in all 8 locations. Under our PIP baseline case review process and during the foreseeable future, we have shifted from a regional case sample to a statewide case sample. So we are hoping and anticipating that we will capture a sampling of cases. It's a random sample, but from across the state. So any county, tribal, DJS office throughout the state is subject to having a case in this sample. And because we're not coming out on site any longer, our interviews are primarily going to be face-to-face. So when we're beginning to line up these cases and manage the interviews, we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but wanted you to know going into it, we will be looking at scheduling those interviews over the phone. Potentially, we're checking into Skype or video conferencing capabilities, because sometimes it is nice to see folks face to face. And we're checking on all of those security and confidentiality considerations. But nonetheless, as we begin to talk about this review process and we talk about the schedule, know that although cases will be coming to a central location, the case managers and the folks that we're interviewing will not necessarily need to travel into Bismarck or wherever the case review is actually being held. So I'll explain that a little bit further. We do have a period under review. The period under review is noted on the orientation agenda here, and that is October 1st, 2018, up until the date the case is assigned. So the period under review is the period for which practice will be assessed, and any of the items that we rate, and we'll talk about those items, but we're looking for those things to have occurred during this window of time. And that window of time is 10/1/18 to the date the case is reviewed. Okay. Now, in the regional reviews, in the former approach, we would come out for 1 week and review all the region's cases. In order to accomplish the 65 cases, what we're doing is approaching it first with a larger case review, again during a week, and that's going to be the week of January 13th through 17th. And we're praying and hoping that there's no blizzard or major snowstorm that week. I should note that we've identified the week of January 27th as a backup or alternate week in case we have inclement weather during the week of the 13th. Now, the week of the 13th, what we hope to accomplish is reviewing 16 foster care cases and 10 in-home cases. Then if you look to this part of the agenda here, we'll talk about these columns later, but during the January 20th to 24th week, that's a holiday week. Martin Luther King holiday falls in that week. So we're going to only try and review 3 cases that week. Our QA from this point forward, from basically January 20th to the end of March, the QA unit will become responsible for the case reviews. This is when it shifts. And we're going to team up our review unit of 8 folks. We're going to form 3 review teams, and 2 will be designated a QA lead. And throughout all the reviews, Diana and I will serve as what we call second level QA. That's kind of a final look on in the state to make sure that everything is being reviewed consistently. So this first week we're reviewing 16 foster care, 10 in-home. This week we're reviewing 3 foster care. This week of February 3rd, we'll review 3 cases, foster care cases, and 3 in-home cases. The following week, we will review 5 foster care cases and 1 in-home case. The following week, we'll review 2 foster care cases and 1 in-home week. That's another holiday week for President's Day. Then we'll get back to kind of full course. We'll review 4 foster care and 2 in-home. The following week, 3 foster care, 3 in-home. The following week, 1 foster care and 2 in-home. And our final week of 3 foster care and 3 in-home. Now that's the schedule that we've laid out, and hope all the stars align for that to happen. And that will get us to the 40 cases for foster care and 25 for in-home. We'll move from that larger statewide effort that first week into pairs within the QA unit, and then you'll hear us potentially move into reviewers individually reviewing cases. We haven't done that too much in North Dakota. We tend to prefer doing it in teams, but to accomplish reviewing all these cases, we will eventually break down into a reviewer of 1. So you may be interviewed by just 1 reviewer. And that's the schedule that we've laid out to review those cases. Now, one of the pressing agenda items for all of us is that piece of case sampling. What cases are going to be reviewed? And so I want to take a few moments today to show and talk through how we determine the cases that are going to be in the sample. And to do that, I'm going to share a different document with you. So give me just a quick moment, please. I'm going to switch over to this document. Now, in order for a case to be eligible in our sample, certain conditions have to have been met during what we call a sampling period. So it's typically the first 6 months of our period under review. So for foster care, for example, from October 1, 2018 through March 31st, 2019, to become eligible, really all that needs to happen is that a child is in foster care for more than 24 hours. Now there are certain conditions, like the child cannot be age 18 for the entire period under review. But certainly if a child turns 18 during the period under review, the case is eligible up until their 18th birthday. A child can be on a trial home visit for a portion of the period under review, but they can't be on a trial home visit for the entire period under review. So we look for some of those automatic disqualifiers. And all of those cases would then go into a spreadsheet. which I'll talk a little bit more in a second. Now, for our in-home population, a family is to have received in-home case management services for a minimum of 45 days during that case sampling period from October to March. And if a case opened up at the end of March, as long as they were continuously open for 45 days, they could still be an eligible case. Now, in a foster or an in-home case, in-home, no child in that family could have been in foster care for more than 24 hours. So if an in-home case is pooled, they become eligible, but the weekend before the review, say on Friday morning, the child goes into foster care and is in foster care throughout the weekend. Come Monday morning, we are not able to review that case as an in-home case because a child was in foster care for more than 24 hours. So there are some conditions that would cause us to eliminate an in-home case sample or in-home case. And some of these eliminations could happen, like that example, all the way up until our review is actually scheduled. So in either case, it's very important that we identify alternate cases. So for each of the review events that I listed earlier, we'll also identify the X amount of cases, say 16 foster care, plus 3 cases as alternates for review that week. We'll have 19 cases identified for that first week. Likewise, in foster care, we need to review 10 cases, so we will identify and prepare 13 cases. Now, the other thing that makes our case sampling process complex is that it's not just a luck of the draw of falling in the spreadsheet. You may hear that we do interviews, and those interviews are extremely important to capturing all of what's happening in a case. We don't go just by what's on paper or in the record. So it's a terminology that we call key case participants. And I'll come back to this spreadsheet because I want to pop over to one more that we sent out, and it was the key case participant roster. And it looks a little something like this. And generally we try to make our notes per case on this, where we have to identify who are the key case participants unique to that case. Generally speaking, a key case participant would be the mother and father in a foster care case and in-home case, any of the potential mothers and fathers. In a foster care case, we have a target child, and in-home, it would be all of the children in the family.
Good afternoon. What are you
on? And for the children to be interviewed, they would have to be of age and developmentally appropriate. So age, we normally say school age, maybe 6 or 7. But again, we want to look at that child's capabilities. But generally, those are key case participants, sometimes supervisors, sometimes CPS workers. If it's a target child in foster care, then we're looking to find and speak with all the providers that provided care to that child during the period under review. So this list of who the key case participants are could be rather small, or it could be rather long. But it is very a targeted population who's assessed, whose involvement in this case is assessed in the case. Sometimes we may ask if someone is available to speak to that person's perspective. Say if a child is 9 years old but not developmentally able to be interviewed, would there be a guardian ad litem or a therapist that may be able to speak to that child's perspective. So we have to identify who those key case participants are and then reach out to them to secure their willingness to participate. So back to my spreadsheet a little bit to show how this case sample and elimination process works. Our partners at the Decision Support Services go into the back end of frame, and they do their statistical gymnastics, and they identify all the potential cases in frame that would meet the eligible criteria. And they put all those cases in a pool, and just like bingo numbers, they put them in a Tumblr program, and then they process them into this spreadsheet. And you'll see that there's a rank order from 1 to infinity. No, not infinity. But in this latest foster care sample, we have probably about 1,000 cases. So of all of the eligible cases, we've got top to bottom in no special order. And then we go about identifying who the key case participants are and are they willing to participate. And then we take the eligible cases from top to bottom. Now we do still have a few outstanding steps in this process that we're working out with the Children's Bureau even at this late date. And but generally speaking, we go from top to bottom, and as long as the case is eligible, then they get brought into the sample. Now, if you were around during 2018 when we were doing our sample, we were looking at more than one case for a worker being brought into the sample. But because we're looking at a statewide sample and not a regional sample, the one caveat that we have is that no single case manager will have more than 2 cases in the sample, okay? So no more than one case manager would have no more than 2 cases in the sample. Now that might mean they have a case pulled on January 13th weekly review, and then they have a case pulled in February, but they would have no more than 2 cases in the sample. We don't have that maximum for agencies, so it is possible that a single agency might have more than 2 cases in the sample. But through the process of elimination, through all 65 cases, our Children's Bureau partners kind of reassure us that we ultimately will get to that statewide sample. We'll be tracking agencies, zones, is it a tribal partner, is it a DJS partner? But we're not able to really have a maximum of a per agency. So a lot of it is that luck of the draw in the sample, and if we can secure the key case participant interviews. Now again, a shout out to the reason for our alternate cases. If during the week we have all of the interviews lined up and we're feeling good and we're moving forward, and on the day of the review we're scheduled to talk with bio mom, with birth mom, and then birth mom doesn't answer the phone, we can't secure her interview or we can't secure her perspective, then the case is eliminated even during the review week, and we would move towards an alternate case. So that's why it's important to prepare and ready those alternate cases for each review week. Now, one of our outstanding questions on how we approach this sample is if we can use alternate cases in a following week. Now, maybe as I've started to talk about this case sampling process and the scheduling, you might start to get the sense that that's kind of hard to do if we don't know who our sample is for sure during a review week. Typically what we saw in 2018, in order to get to the regular number of cases, the maximum number of cases we needed to review in a week, we would have to go down 2 or 3 times into the sample in order to come out of that, if you will, with a firm number of cases. So I guess what I mean, if we're to review 5 cases, we normally would have to explore up to 15 or even 20, 25 cases in order to succeed in having 5 cases identified, because some were eliminated. Maybe another factor is if a sibling group of 3 kids all randomly show up in that grouping, we're only going to review 1 of the sibling, not all 3 of them. So there are those types of considerations. I'm going to take a pause. I think I saw a question come in. Are the pools going to be separate for every week, or one pool at the beginning and then go down the list per week? That is the question, my friends. What I can tell you is that we originally proposed to help keep the week's slate of cases as simplified as possible. We were proposing that for the first week, say in January, we consider and pull cases out of week 1 all the way down, consider down to like 86 or 85, I think it was, somewhere along there, and pull out the 19 foster care cases. For in-home, out of the sample, to get those 10 plus the 3 alternates, we would go down and reach out to the 50. And then for the following week, we would go to the next section of the case sample and pull cases out of there. Because our goal is to identify cases that are going to be reviewed, all of them, by January 13th. So that when we get started reviewing cases on the 13th, where we basically know what our cases are going to be. Now, there is a question pending with the Children's Bureau, and since our morning's webinar, what I can tell you is that I do have a call scheduled with them later this afternoon, because the strictest of federal procedures is that we go from top to bottom, and that sectioning of the case sample may not be consistent with what is allowed. And in some ways, if we're reaching out to, in my first week's example, if we're reaching out down to 86 and we get to case 50 and we can find some cases that are identified, then can we use those cases and not have to dig down as much? Because we know for the agencies and the QA unit staff, it's a lot of effort to do that reach out and connect with those key case participants. Some of these cases could be closed cases. And so on that end, it may make sense to just strictly go straight down. And I don't have an exact answer for that one. What I can tell you is that our goal is to be able to identify the cases that are going to be reviewed in January, the week of the 13th to 17th and 20th to 24th, to identify that section of cases by the end of this week, so that agencies have time to do some of the preparation and we can firm up a schedule before the review. Once we get those cases identified, we're going to shift in to then filling in the rest of the schedule through February and March. I really want us to be able to identify the cases and alternates before we get started with the actual reviews. I anticipate we will always have to work with alternates and some changes from the schedule because people get sick, things happen. But as best we can, I want to identify those cases and alternates. This is a new process for us, so I expect that we're going to learn a lot about it. So this is the sample for the foster care. We have something very similar for in-home. That same concept and process will continue. Let me go back to our agenda. So we've talked a little bit about the eligible foster care and in-home cases. Now this case selection process I've touched on. How we're doing this now, it may help to know that in the past, the regional office and the local agencies really did the lion's share of this work. We've always had this case sample be generated from decision support staff, but that follow-up and that connection is done by the regional office and local agency. We also know that this is a very crazy time, let alone the holidays that are natural. We know that there are plans with the redesign and forming of zones and different redesign efforts going on. So we know it's a crazy time. And so the QA unit is taking the lead at this case selection process. They are reaching out and will continue to reach out to the agencies on potential cases, and then partnering with the agencies to help identify who are the key case participants, who's best to contact the families, and negotiate how that is going to work. Now, initially, I just broke up chunks of the sample and sent our 6 staff out to connect with you. And what I realized in some cases, that meant 5 different people contacting one agency. And that's really not the craziness that we want to foster. So my plan is to meet with our team tomorrow, hopefully get the rest of our answers from the Children's Bureau, and reconvene our approach so that one of our QA leads is working with an agency about any potential foster care or in-home cases. And ultimately, it's the QA unit and myself that will determine if a case is eliminated, but that partnership about the dynamics of the case and efforts to find the families will be very important. Sometimes if key case participants are not able to participate or we can't get their perspective, we will need to eliminate. And sometimes it's that we are able to still keep that case in, recognizing we weren't able to secure that particular interview because the individual simply can't be found, types of things. There will be those discussions, but ultimately it will be up to the QA unit, who then will share the reasons with the Children's Bureau during this PIP monitoring period. How are we doing? Any questions so far? All right. Rolling on. Once we have maybe the list of preliminary cases that look like, yep, the key case participants are willing, we're good to go, our team comes back and we start to identify those cases. And then we'll be able to say, these are the cases in the sample, here are all alternates. And now we can start forming a review schedule. One of the attachments that I sent out with the email, let me get that, pull that up. And it is the general review week. Now this review week still will be a bit in flux. Some adjustments are going to be needed, but this is the general framework that we're looking at, even for the review week. Monday morning, of course the week in January, folks are going to be traveling in. During our remote reviews, the QA unit will have time to do other administrative responsibilities that they have. And Monday afternoon, we'll get going with a review. We'll start with a bit of a unit meeting, make sure our scheduling is intact, and everyone has what they need. Then they will begin. Generally, our first case up is the foster care case, and generally those are a bit more complex. And so that allows the review team to review the case file, review information that's in frame. The reviewers will all have access to frame. They will have an auditor reviewers level access where they can see but not touch, so they can read information but they can't edit or change anything. So they'll do that Monday afternoon. Tuesday will generally be the day that we slate for interviews with individuals. Typically, we like to start out by interviewing the case manager. If CPS is involved, we might have try and have that interview with CPS. And so Tuesday is largely filled with interviews. We hope that most interviews will happen between 8 and 5, but if we need to go into early evening hours to accommodate a family or foster family, we will do our best to accommodate that. We don't want anyone burning the midnight oil, and so we're not seeing that interviews would go any later than 8 p.m. And those would only be as needed. But generally they wrap up their reviews and information and begin putting some of their preliminary findings into the instrument. So that on Wednesday morning, they would come and they're ready to kind of shift gears to what I call the day 2 case. So it's their second case that they review during the week. Typically, that's an in-home case. Typically, that is generally a little bit less on the file information, and so we have them review those documents at the beginning and aim for an initial interview time at 10 a.m. With a case manager when possible. Now, once we finalize the schedule, that's where the tweaking comes in. But other interviews throughout the day, and they're reviewing that second case. Thursday is a day set aside generally if we need to pull in an extra interview or reschedule an interview from earlier in the week, but we can still keep the case in the sample. We try and do that for early Thursday morning because pretty much by early Thursday morning, if we don't have all the interviews, then we have to go to an alternate case, and it makes Thursday a pretty busy day. But assuming that we can get all the interviews in, then Thursday is also the time for them to begin applying the instrument, doing the preliminary findings, working with their QA lead to get things in order. Our hope is that by Thursday afternoon, we would be able to do our preliminary results meeting with the agency. And that preliminary results meeting, a PRM, is intended to provide the immediate feedback to the agency so they have a sense at least how their case fared on the preliminary basis. Our goal is we'll definitely be doing that for both cases, and our thought is that we would do our day 1 case on Thursday afternoon and our day 2 case on Friday morning. The rest of the time, the teams will be meeting with their QA leads, second level QA, to try and firm up and complete the review in as much as possible during that review week. And then we can get the cases sent back to the agency. So roughly that's what a review week is going to involve. For those holiday weeks that I mentioned, instead of 2 weeks, we'll be adapting this a little bit and only be reviewing one case during those weeks. Okay. Any questions on that so far? Okay. Excuse me for just a quick minute. Don't want to cough in your ears. All right. So we've talked a lot about the review and the instrument and preliminary findings and all of that. And we certainly know that these case reviews have that compliance component to the effort. However, this effort is so much more than just hitting a checkbox of case reviews. These reviews provide a window into practice of how the children and families are experiencing the services they receive from our agency. It gives us that window of what's going really well in cases, so we know to keep doing that. And what's not going so well, so we can change it. And it's the start, but certainly not the comprehensive effort, but it's the start of that examination. Why or what's going on? What's giving us some indication that things aren't working the way it should, so that those continuous quality improvements can happen and we can take that deeper dive. So these reviews really have the intent of strengthening our practice so that when we say that we have safe kids and stronger families, we can know how we're doing that. And that larger purpose permeates the reason why we're doing all of this. And of course, assessing casework practice and outcomes with families, it's hard to capture everything that we do in one instrument and one process. You know, it really can't be done. But what this process does provide us is that window of opportunity and those glances into 18 potential slices of the pie. And I want to make sure I'm sharing the right document. We've got our rating summary. We do. Okay. So for those that have had cases reviewed before, this is probably looking familiar. It is the instrument we've used for the federal review and we used in 2018. Those slices of practice that we're looking at all relate to 2 safety outcomes, 2 permanency outcomes for kiddos in foster care, and 3 well-being outcomes for our children and families. Those outcomes are assessed by various items. Our safety outcome 1, children are first and foremost protected from abuse and neglect. Item 1 is our, what I like to call our CPS item. So when CPS is involved during a case that is pooled during the period under review, we are looking at the timeliness of initiating the response to that report and the face-to-face contact between the agency and the alleged victims. And that's what we're assessing in item 1, which makes up safety outcome 1. Safety outcome 2 really expands to all the cases that we work with, whether they're tribal, DJS, county. We're really looking at those safety management and that safety and risk assessments. Item 2 is looking at the outcome itself is that children are safely maintained in their homes whenever possible and appropriate. Item 2 is looking at when safety concerns are present for a family in their home, that how is the agency accessing or facilitating their access to emergency services? Those safety services that are intended to help keep the youth out of foster care or prevent reentry. So again, it's a real fine slice of the pie that we're looking at in item 2, and we're very much assessing safety of the children in their own home. Now, item 3, we're looking at safety and risk assessments no matter where children live. So it's a really big item. We're looking at those safety and risk assessments initially and ongoing at critical key points in the case. We're looking at how safety planning is done. We are looking at how safety is assured for visitations and how safety is provided for kiddos in foster care, in their foster care setting. So it's a really big item. Put those items together and we look at outcome 2, safety 2. And those can apply to in-home and foster care cases. When we switch to permanency outcomes, we're only looking at a target child in foster care, so only for foster care cases. Permanency outcome 1 is that children have permanency and stability in their living situations. So item 4 is going to look at placement stability. Are any of the changes that the child is having in foster care planned by the agency and in an effort to achieve case goals? Item 5 is going to look if the permanency goals that are established and in effect during the period under review, were they established timely and were they appropriate? Item 6 is going to look at the achieving permanency, and is that happening in a timely fashion? Item 6 is also the one that looks at agency and court efforts. Excuse me. So then permanency outcome 2, that larger outcome, is looking at the continuity of family relationships and connections, and are they preserved for youth in foster care? So it's a matter of preserving those significant relationships. And we break that down by looking at placement of siblings in care with other siblings, if they have other siblings in care. We're looking at visitation between the target child and their parents or other children in care. We're looking at how the agency is supporting preserving those important connections, extended family, community, faith, tribal. This is the item that will ask an ICWA-related question about the agency making a sufficient inquiry to see if ICWA applies or not. And if it does apply, then there are some tribal notification and placement preference questions that come up in this item. Item 10 is going to look at relative placement and considering relatives. I do have a special note on this particular item with all of the excitement and in many ways good work that's happening with our new expanded definition of identified relative in our foster care licensing laws and policies. Excuse me. As some know or all know, what I'm talking about is the new expanded definition of an identified relative can include fictive kin, those folks in the community that have significant ties to the child, and for the purposes of foster care licensing could be identified as a relative. Important folks. For the purposes of the OSRI, however, this item is really looking at those relatives as defined by marriage, blood, and adoption only. Now, it does not mean that if a child is in placement with one of those fictive folks, that this item is going to be an area needing improvement. It just means that we're not going to be considering a child in a fictive kin placement as in a relative placement. Again, keep in mind we're tying into the federal process, and this is a definition that's being applied throughout the whole country. So just be aware of that. If you have questions about it, see me later or post a question in the chat box. Item 11 is looking at those efforts to strengthen the relationship between the target child and their parents through efforts other than visits. So that makes up permanency outcome 2 for foster care cases. We then move to our well-being outcome. And this applies to all of the children, be it foster care or in-home, in the sense of this larger outcome. Now, item 12 is an item that has 3 sections. We're looking at how the agency is assessing and addressing the needs and services for children is one section, a target child in foster care, or all children in an in-home case, parents, and foster parents. And in this item, foster parents is defined broadly to any family provider, whether they're licensed or not. So those fictive kin could fall under assessment in this item. Item 13 is going to be looking at involvement in case planning. Item 14 and 15 are going to be looking at the frequency and the quality of visits between the case manager and the child in item 14, and with the parents for item 15. Those items make up well-being outcome 1. Well-being outcome 2 is our educational component, and we've got item 16 that looks at how the agency is assessing and addressing any educational needs of youth. Well-being outcome 3 speaks to receiving adequate services to meet physical and behavioral mental health needs. Now, item 17 is looking at physical and dental health, and item 18 is specific to behavioral and mental health. Did I say that right? 17 is physical and dental, 18 is behavioral and mental health. Now, items 17 and 18 both are going to have some questions as it relates to providing appropriate oversight for any medications that the children might have. So that is going to show up in item 17 or 18 if it's applicable for foster youth. If it's an in-home, those questions are going to be not applicable. So you can see that that covers a lot of ground in our casework practice with families. And so this is the instrument and the items that we are going to be assessing. Let's go back to our agenda. Any questions? Now, the information that's needed to rate each item, we are going to get from a couple places. We're going to get from the case file, but we also get from the interviews, which is why those interviews are so important. And what we hear in interviews is, and corroborated through interviews, is treated equally with what we see in writing. So both sources of information is going to help inform the ultimate rating that we have. Now, to help review teams get on board and understand the complexities of these cases, we will talk a little bit about the case file, what we're needing there, and also some case preparation documents. The case files that we're going to need, and I added this clarification after our morning conversation. What we need is the entire case management file. Now that does include, which is why we kind of have trouble sometimes coming up with the words, because not all case, sometimes CPS records are kept separately than the case management file. So what we're going to need is the entire case management file and the entire CPS file if that's applicable, okay? But provider files, we're not going to need. PATH files, ASK files, we no longer need those actual files. Now here you'll see the note about independent living. If independent living is involved in a case, then that information that's necessary, like a copy of the individual independent living plan and some of those services that they're receiving, those should be documented in the case file, and we'll be looking for that in the case management file. Some agencies are still on paper files, so we'll talk about that process of getting those paper files to the review teams. And some agencies are electronic files. And so electronic files work just as well, and we'll talk about that as well. Typically a USB, jump drive, flash drive, that's going to be the best mechanism. A lot of laptops these days don't have the CD-ROM disk driver readers that we used to have. But if that is a need for your agency, please let me know so we can just plan accordingly. Excuse me. Okay, so the case preparation documents. Now, keep in mind that both the federal process and the reviews that we did in 2018, we really do want to support the agency in having sufficient time to prepare the cases. You can imagine with the time frame that we're operating under, this is going to be a challenge. So we are working very hard to get our list of cases of who this is going to apply, you know, what cases are selected by the end of this week, so that you have time to get us that information. And we'll talk about this schedule here in a moment. I do see a question here that, can we still send the physical file if we aren't an electronic file county? And yes, absolutely yes. You will be able to send it certified, and here we're sending it all throughout all reviews. Lauren is going to be the conduit for the case files. So that can happen. Now, in addition to the case file, we do still have our typical case preparation documents. We have found these to be extremely helpful to the QA leads, to the review team, everyone working and trying to absorb a lot of information in a little time. We have a case preparation. We'll start with that. Now, what I'll say, given the time frame, we recognize that it's a very short time frame and it's right over the holiday season. So we may not have the time to complete these as thoroughly as maybe we would otherwise like to. Please know we understand that. We're going to work with you. We're just simply going to all have to do the best that we can do to make this work. So this case preparation, the supervisory document, we still request and ask that supervisors complete this as a way to help support their workers getting ready for the review, and also getting a sense to look through the case before it gets sent off for review. It's mostly a checkbox, but there is an opportunity for comment section that you can put some narrative if you find that helpful. If there's no CPS involved in a case or no in-home, you can just simply check these not applicable. So that is a very quick look at the supervisory document that we ask to be completed. There is also a summary document, one for in-home and one for foster care. Now, here's the in-home case narrative. This narrative is going, this summary form is going to walk you through a lot of the instruments and item questions that we're going to need to specifically have some information about. And it helps guides more than, can you sit down and tell me about this case? Because we are looking for some targeted information. I will call your attention to the CPS Reports table. We are looking for any CPS 960 report that came in from October 1st, 2018 until you send off the case. Now, if there was a services required finding during the period under review, then we'd ask that you also complete any CPS report 6 months prior. We no longer have the lifetime CPS question. There used to be a question about over the course of the lifetime of this case, how many CPS reports were they? That's gone away. However, in item 3, when we're looking at risk and safety management, we are looking at any concerns for repeat maltreatment or repeat safety concerns. And what triggers that is if there is a service required finding during the period under review, then reviewers have to go back 6 months. But other than that, it's just what came in or didn't come in during the period under review. That will be the same on the foster care checklist. And this looks probably familiar if anyone has had a case review or an agency has had a case reviewed in the past. That's the in-home, and right here is what the foster care summary looks like, if I'm not making you sick. You will see that there are some targeted questions. Describe any safety concerns for the target child during visitation with other family members. If there were no safety issues, then you could put none. If there were safety concerns, then it gives you an opportunity to list those bullets. Again, we understand if it won't be, we're not looking for a novel here. We're looking for those bullets of information that will help us absorb a lot of information in a short time. And the last tool that really helps us do that is a genogram. And some agencies already have genograms in their file as a matter of your work with families. If so, scan it, copy it off, send it. That will work just fine. But if you don't have a genogram already in place, we do ask that you complete a genogram and send with it. This genogram resource is one tool if you need help throwing that together or need a refresher on how to put together a genogram. But if you just put it on a blank piece of paper, that will work as well. But we do ask for a genogram to come along with the case preparation documents. All right. Now the last document I like to share, and this is much more of a resource for you, file it in the FYI. It's not something that you have to complete and send back to us. We call this a pink sheet because it's printed on pink for our review staff. But this first part really, it gives the reviewers, the folks that agency people will be talking to when they have their interview, and who the key case families, other key case participants will be talking to when they call in for their interview. So this first part is just a reminder to our reviewers of key bits of information we want them to pass on and touch base on. But the other piece of sample interview questions. Now we tell our reviewers that they don't have a specific script, so these don't have to be the questions or all of the questions. They may come up with their own questions, but we do want their questions to target a particular item in the instrument. It's any questions that we're asking, we want to help inform one of the ratings. So we also recognize that the anxiety that's produced when you find out that your case is being reviewed. And if you're a first or second timer, you might be extra nervous and wonder, what kind of questions are they going to be asking me? Well, this document can help you anticipate what some of those questions are going to be. And that's really why we want to pass this on to you and how to use this document to help prepare for the interview so you know what kind of questions. And we call it the pink sheet. You'll see that there's questions about safety and risk, about permanency, those family connections we were talking about, what were some of the needed services, what about case planning. You might see how some of these questions mirror those 18 items that we talked about not too long ago. So that's a resource for you to use in your preparation. We'll share back to our agenda. All right, so those are our preparation documents. Now the due dates for things. This is where, you know, it's going to feel rushed. But in order to accomplish and get us to this goal, we've got these tight timelines. And what we're asking is the case file, be it paper or electronic, get sent to Lauren, and they're really due to CFS no later than, say, for the January 13th review by January 8th. So the date to mail it by is January 5th. For our January 20th reviews, we need them by January 12th. And here's the schedule that we've outlined for those. I want to touch base on some of the responsibilities in the partnership that we've been very fortunate to have in the past, and we look forward to continue as we move forward. In the former structure, we would used to have local site coordinators. The regional office primarily were our local site coordinators. They worked very closely with the agency, and they helped during the case selection and case elimination process, sending out letters to confirm interview days and time. And a lot of that our unit is going to be taking care of this go around, but certainly identifying the key case participants, potentially reaching out. If it makes sense for a case for an agency staff to reach out to someone, we want that to happen. If it makes better sense for us, our staff, the QA folks, to reach out, then we want to make that happen. So there's that partnering during the case sampling process, and preparing the case files. Hopefully the tools there, you can enter them in on the computer. If you type easier, then you handwrite. So there's those preparing the case files. Now, participating in the agencies, you will receive the interview schedule. Once we know a case is in the sample, then we're going to be able to start targeting, okay, Susie's going to be interviewed at Tuesday at 10, and Mary's going to be interviewed Tuesday at 1. Here's the number, here's what's going to happen. So you will have a firm version of that interview schedule, as well as how it fits into the week. Now, alternate cases get kind of interesting because we don't know if we're going to need them or not. So scheduling with an alternate case looks a little bit more like, hey, thank you for being willing to be a part of this review. If we need it as an alternate case, it's going to be really hard to tell you a specific time. So what I'm wondering is, what are the days and time that are better for you to be reached between Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of this week? And you're capturing their general availability, and then we'll know that as well. So all of that information will go back to the agency. And, you know, we're still fleshing out the role of the regional office, but I expect they'll have that schedule as well. Because one of the key things during the review week that really helped keep more cases in the sample was that if a key case participant, either we had a wrong number or they weren't available the first time that we called, maybe the case manager went out to the home visit or to the home to remind them, hey, you were supposed to be on the phone, or something along those lines. We're really looking forward to having that type of partnership again so that we can keep as many cases in the sample as possible. This is going to be the first time relying solely on telephone or Skype interviews. So that partnership I'm anticipating is going to be very critical. Now, where the regional office may be able to come into play is if the worker or the agency has court cases, maybe other emergencies have come into the agency, and maybe that regional staff person can help be that on call, if you will, backup to help support ensuring that interviews happen. We'll work it out. So that's a lot of that partnership and some of the responsibilities. Ultimately, you know, that relationship between our QA staff and the agency to secure the right schedule is going to be important. And so we're looking at ways, I may have said this, as far as instead of 5 QA people reaching out to the same agency, we're going to be doing some revamping tomorrow and see if we can get a QA person attached to a couple of the agencies so it's a little bit less confusing for everybody involved. So I just went through a lot of information. What other questions are out there? You can either unmute yourself and ask, or you can type it into the chat menu.
Leanne,
Yes.
with the changing that's going to be happening, going from county to zones, for that supervisor form, is that to be the supervisor prior to the zone, or would it be the new zone supervisor?
I would say the one that makes the most sense to complete, who had the most involvement during our period under review, is that maybe sending supervisor, for lack of better words, that knew the case during the most time. Yet if a new supervisor is coming on, it may afford them the opportunity to get acquainted with the new case. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. I think where it's going to be is what's going to make the most sense for those local agencies in that transition. Great question. Okay, I see a question here. Who are the key people for a case where TPR has happened? Another great question. And just like most things in child welfare, there's not always a black and white. It falls into my it depends category. But there are some general principles. If parental rights were terminated for parents prior to the period under review, so October 1, so like up to 9/30/2018, and they're not involved in the case any longer, then they would not be key case participants. The challenge, especially with as long of a period under review as we're working with, if parental rights were terminated earlier in the period under review, those birth parents could still be key case participants. So if parental rights were terminated on June 30th of 2019, then for that time period between October and, oh, I'm sorry about my dog, folks. I hope you're not hearing him too much, her too much. It's kind of distracting me. I'm so sorry. Hold on just a second.
I can pick up while she's taking care of Maisie. So the time period for which the parents had rights to the child would be assessed for the purposes of the on-site case review. So in her example, if, I think she said that the termination of parental rights occurred on June 1st, because our period under review starts October 1st of 2018, we would consider those parents as participants in that case from October 1st of 18 to June 1st of 2019. But even within that, we, like Leanne said, it's never really black and white. It's considered, we have to look at the circumstances of the case too. Did I answer that right, Leanne?
You did. And my apologies, but thank you for stepping in and keeping it rolling. So that's how it impacts. Now, if parental rights were terminated and those birth parents are still involved, maybe there's a open adoption agreement that's being worked on and they are still being informed of the case, then we would want to still include them. That's why it's never clear cut, but we do want to look at does it make sense to include them as a key case participant. If parental rights are terminated, they're not a part of the case, then they would not be. Other questions? Well, when we scheduled these webinars, I wasn't quite sure how much time it was going to take. And I never want to keep people longer than we need to. However, I do want to make sure we have as much opportunity to ask questions, because I do know this is a complex process during a complex time with pretty tight time frames. I see another question coming in. If the case is a DJS case, the case manager would be the juvenile court supervisor or the foster care regional rep. If I understand the correction or the question correctly, the case manager would be the DJS worker who is managing that case. And then their supervisor in the past has been able to fill out that supervisor questionnaire for us. So the juvenile court supervisor and the foster care regional rep are generally not a key case participant. They've only been involved in an interview on a very isolated and case-specific process generally, and that's happened during a review week when a team has needed some additional information about court efforts or something that the regional rep would do. Probably an example of a regional rep would be if there is an institutional child protection services report that came in for a foster youth. We've interviewed a foster care regional rep for those situations. But generally speaking, it would be the DJS worker. For our tribal workers, it would be that Title 4E tribal foster care case manager. Oh, I see. I misunderstood.
Yeah,
Juvenile court. I'm sorry about that.
no, sorry. I think I noticed, but like when it comes to when we have to bring the case together. Is it going to be done with the regional foster care rep, like, or would it be done with my juvenile correction specialist, like the DGS worker?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time for me?
Maybe I'm not understanding, or I don't know, maybe my place or not, is where, okay, like when we find out when the cases, whatever cases are taken, foster care,
yep,
ones would, there'll be our cases, but the main person, is that going to be the foster care regional rep? Or like when it comes to the key case participants, that would be like the JCS from DJS, right?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. I just
Yeah.
maybe confused myself.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but yes, that would be the juvenile correctional specialist would be the equivalent of the case manager for that DJS youth who's in foster care.
Okay.
Yeah. And at times we've had, you know, this is across the board, be it tribal, DJS, or county, especially if it's the first time you're having a case reviewed, then you know, sometimes your agency supervisor would be able to sit in on the interview with you, or you know, another agency peer. Certainly, you know, we want you to feel as prepared and comfortable as possible. Now, with the DJS cases, there might be coordination with your county, your local county partners, to know about the CPS aspect of things. If there has been CPS involved in the case, but you would be able to see that in frame. Okay. And then there was a request to repeat when we will be notified which cases are to be ready for week 1. I'll gladly repeat. Our goal for that first week of January 13th and the week of January 20th, so for both those weeks, we aim to notify and have that information by this Friday. So that would be December 20th. And then for the remainder of the weeks, we aim to notify by January 13th, by the time we get started with the actual reviews. And I have talked with our Children's Bureau partners, and in the past, we've really searched high and low for these key case participants. We've reached out, we've sent letters, and we still want to make as diligent of an effort as possible to find them, but we don't have the luxury of time on those. So I do anticipate that if we're not readily able to connect with people, we may have to eliminate and move on so that we can get to that date of December 20th. I remain hopeful because I know it's a lot for the agencies to do that preparation. Okay. And if there are complications as we go through that, sorry, as we go through the schedule, I do see some challenges, and you know, I kind of revert back to we're all going to pull together. We're going to do the best we can, and if something can't happen, we're going to work through it. So I don't always know what that looks like, but we will just stay in touch and work through the best that we can. I thank you for your time and attention today. If there are additional questions, you can email me those at lemiller@nd.gov. My phone is 701-238-3802. So that's how you can reach me. We are going to make either the morning or afternoon session available. We're still working with our partners at the Children and Family Services Training Center. I anticipate to have a link that will let you know how you can find this if you want to come back and review it again. So with that, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, and we'll be in touch. Thanks, everyone.